Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Good Morning Delhi with Sarthak.
That is my name. That's what you're tuned into. And oh man, are we excited about this. Trying to rekindle the fires of the word inside your mind. That's what we're trying to do. And though it sounds grand...
Applaud, everyone. Applaud sarcastically. No, that sounds too sincere. Slow clap. There we go. Nice and condescending.
Thank you very much for the condescension, James. But the idea is to, just to put across the excitement that we feel when we open a new book and that perfume of the page hits you and the word that leads to the tingle in the fingertips. And that's why on Turning the Page, we've got the wonderful Saksham Garg with us, a new entrant into the fantasy genre of indie fiction, Indo-Anglian literature. I believe there's many labels to put. No, Saksham, thank you very much for joining us. So yeah, tell us how did this come about, and what's your favorite label to put as far as putting your book in that bookstore is concerned?
Well, I think fantasy is as close as it gets, for sure. And how did it come about? It came about in the middle of a jog, a cross-country race, interestingly. I used to study in the foothills of the Himalayas in Woodstock School in Mussoorie. And there's a very famous chakkar there, and it's called the chakkar, and it's sort of a bend around the shoulder that circles the tip of the mountain.
Right.
And within punctuating this chakkar is this area called Lal Tibba, which is famous for a scenic view of the snow-capped hills that we can see across.
Sure.
Within this land of the gods that is called Uttarakhand.
Right.
So I was in the middle of a race, trying to make sure I had thoughts other than the race in my head to not, to stay distracted.
Sure.
And it was during one of those that I realized that I'm actually running within the land of the gods, and I've spent my entire life here.
For sure.
And that's when I took that final turn and reached Lal Tibba, and before me were these towering white peaks with snow from top to bottom. And I wondered, knowing very well that one of these is the pious Gangotri, Bandarpooch, Sargrohini, etc., that if this were the land of the gods, and if the gods were alive today, then perhaps behind that elusive area is where they could potentially be staying. And that's where I started first conceiving of the idea of Vanyasa, the magical world, and the map that is on, the fourth page of the book.
Absolutely. And the book that we're talking about is called Samsara, Enter the Valley of the Gods. That's Saksham Garg's maiden effort.
That is.
One of many, I am sure. You've also called literally editing books your profession, because you do work with the publishing house, and your designation there, that little nameplate reads editor, is it not?
It does.
Did that act as a hurdle? Was it a bit of a double-edged sword while you were writing, because you're so used to editing?
No, for sure. I mean, joining Penguin for a huge part of it was because of Samsara. This is a 10-year journey, and I've been at Penguin for half of that journey. After I finished the first or second or third draft of the book, within the first 5 years, I decided it was time to find a way of polishing this further beyond my means. And that included best of the editors, the authors, fantasy authors that have written seminal books in India.
Sure.
And eventually I was lucky enough to go straight from studying economics at Delhi University to the coveted editorial team at Penguin. And within these legendary editors, I slowly found my feet. But it wasn't a double-edged sword at all. In fact, if anything, it was the gift that I desperately needed, because over there, after the fourth draft of the book that I would find time for every now and then in the nights, given the workload, I realized that the manuscript was it read too well for the target audience. There's a balance that one has to find. And when one of the foremost writers in the country took a look at the manuscript and said he loves the diction, the syntax, etc., I realized perhaps that's not the best thing. And if I am going to want to get this book into the hands of everyone, then it needs to have that lucidness, that accessibility in writing. So don't get me wrong, I never sort of dumbed it down. I only took it further, but I wanted to make sure that the diction, the words that were being used were accessible. It made sense, and there was explanation where required, and any arcane terms, because the book is laden with Sanskrit terms, were explained in context.
That's That's actually quite a perspective, isn't it? Things can be too perfect. So, yeah, you got to sometimes celebrate the flaws as well. My entry into the world of fantasy fiction, as far as the Indo-Anglian literature, again, for a lack of better way of explaining it, was Samit Basu, who'd done the Simokin prophecies. He'd actually done a trilogy, and it was there was mythology in it, of course, very, very well dealt with, and there was also a very contemporary touch with it. And when we were talking last, you said something very, very interesting, which is that one of the foremost authors in the country actually read it and said it was nice, which triggered the thought that maybe it was too perfect, and then you literally had to make it more accessible. And that's the thing about language, no?
Yeah.
You can't necessarily put it on a pedestal for others to pull it down, right? It has to sort of wrap its arm around your shoulder a little. But you don't see that as a compromise. The fact that you'd actually written something that had come from the heart, and then you had to sort of
The matter is all
manage
there.
expectations.
No, the matter is all there,
Right.
and it only gets clearer and clearer the more I work on it. But very interestingly, how you put that the media piece needs to put their arm around you to help you. Well, books is perhaps one of the only forms of media, as opposed to, let's say, TV or movies, where there is effort required from the consumer's end.
Sure.
I mean, and that is why I wanted to bridge that gap. And even in that ninth draft that I refer to, where I decided to, work
The
on the
ninth draft, I underline.
Yeah.
That's the tough work that's required to write a book.
No, I've been obsessed with this book for a while. So even that ninth draft was, the further refining of the things that I was scared to say, and therefore are important. And that's the reason why this book needs to exist. And you termed it as a fantasy book. It's equal parts fantasy and equal parts Hindu mythology.
Right.
But the reason why this book needed to exist is because the Hindu mythology in it covers a segment of our 4,000-year-old, 4,500-year-old mythology.
Sure.
But primarily the first aspect. I mean, it is Samsara, Enter the Valley of the Gods, is in a way a journey through the Rig Veda, the oldest sacred text that's still in continued use.
Sure.
And we have marriage rituals that have hymns from the Rig Veda even today.
Yeah.
But the Rig Veda, for whatever reason, continues to be ignored, and if not ignored, definitely overlooked. And particularly its protagonist, over half of which the verses are dedicated to, the Rig Veda's verses are dedicated to Lord Indra, has been later portrayed as an insecure deity.
Sure.
But
Sure.
why the Rig Veda is so important, and why must we try and resurrect said deity and religious text, is because the gods and the stories and the hymns that are told in it are more real than anything. I know that the sun exists, and therefore Aditya / Surya is more prevalent in my life than any other deity. This is not a comparison, but these elemental gods have so much in common to their Indo-European cousins. Indra is Zeus, he is Thor, he is And
of course.
And Indra, in the Rig Veda, Indra is fighting Vritra, who represents blockage, and he is the one who's blocking the divine rivers that is stopping mankind from going from hunter-gatherers to ones who can actually learn to do agriculture.
And actually, that's the beauty of our literary heritage, is it not?
It is.
I mean, it's always layer upon layer, and you need to keep reading to actually peel the layers off to get the meanings. There's always a new meaning, is it not? We were talking about the rigors of research, Saksham, because obviously there's one way of doing it, which is to say that, oh, this is fantasy only from my mind. But you've actually gone ahead and added the Rig Veda and the Himalayan myths as well, and the stories, and there are so many of them actually there. In fact, I saw Stephen Alter writing some good things about it, and his Becoming a Mountain is sort of a seminal work. So that must have felt good, no?
Yeah, for sure. He was a big part of the inspiration. He'd come down to 5th grade, Stephen, in Woodstock, and talked about one of his earlier books.
Right.
And at that moment, I knew that, I want to be like him one day. And I went and visited him approximately a month ago, and chilled with him at his place in the Woodstock campus up in Landour in Missouri. And he was thoroughly, and that's when I presented him with a copy, and a month later, after he'd gone over the book and absolutely loved it, was very happy to provide an honest endorsement.
That's fantastic. What's also fantastic is the fact that you seem to have done your research well on
Yeah.
on this one.
Yeah.
We're living in a world where attention spans are really short, and information. This is of course entirely personal as an opinion,
Right.
but information is masquerading as knowledge because there's so much of it that
Right.
we sometimes tend to forget that information is the thread
Right.
that needs to be woven into the fabric of knowledge in that
Right.
way. And we also tend to forget that the end product really deserves a journey that's really tough. So,
Yeah.
what was your journey to writing the book like, as far as the research was concerned, as far as the reading up was concerned? Because it's important to remember the pitfalls as well, isn't
Right.
it?
No, there was one larger challenge that I definitely faced, which is to make sure that the mythology in the book was sound, despite the fact that there wasn't a lot of material out there for it. The Rig Veda, the Vishnu Puranas. I mean, Rig Veda, by that I mean the story of Indra. The Vishnu Puranas, the famous Samudra Manthan story that is mentioned in the book.
Sure.
And Sukumari Bhattacharya ji, who's a Sanskrit scholar, was one of the inspirations that I could refer to again and again. And at the same time, I wanted to make sure, like you mentioned earlier, the anglicized version of it there, and for that came in Wendy Doniger, and together for the first couple of years they took on my understanding of the elemental gods of the classical Hinduism texts, such as the Puranas, such as the Rig Vedas, and the later texts that followed, and they are actually a mirror to each other, because to sort of answer a question that I put up earlier is why is the Rig Veda overlooked today, is because it doesn't really tell a story. It's a collection of hymns that you can only decode upon reading the Puranas later, and they're a reflection of each other. So it was important for me to not only understand the Rig Veda and then go back to the Puranas and then come back and try and interpret, like you said, the distinction between information and the fabric that makes it knowledge. So that is, that back and forth was consistent. But the mythology that's used in the book is another challenge that was presented ahead of me, was to make sure that I could take these stories that are often read to us by our nanis or our dadis, but make it cool and popular, right?
Yeah, of course.
And that has been the core tenet of Samsara, is how can you transform the seventh limb of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, also known as Pratyahara, into a cool magic system where the characters can transform their consciousness and transfer it to any other living being, whether it's an eagle, a tree, a fish at the bottom of the ocean, and see from their eyes and perspective, or whether it was to take the idea of samsara, which is the cycle, and moksha, brahman, and karma, and make them popular and relatable, and have it Marvel meets Harry Potter meets India sort of a situation.
sure.
And so throughout this journey, I referred to the Vishnu Puranas for the Samudra Manthan. And interestingly, a lot of people know about the halala, which is the poison that came out and Lord Shiv consumed to save humanity from the Samudra Manthan, and the many other gifts that came out of it, but one of which is the divine Kalp Vriksha, which is the wish-giving, wish-granting tree.
Sure.
And Lord Indra, as it goes in the Puranas, rushed away with it, deceiving the Devas as king of the deceiving the Asuras as king of the Devas. He brought it back to Mount Meru, which is also called Amravati, and then the Asuras waged an eternal war.
Sure.
And it's said that this is one of the biggest wars that have ever occurred, and it went on for ages, and yugs, as it's mentioned in the text.
Sure.
Yeah, but the story ends, and it ends at a thread where it says that Lord Indra took the tree, the main contention of the altercation, and hid it somewhere in the Himalayas. And standing there in that middle of that jog, looking across to those 4 mountains, I imagine it's right behind that.
As we talked about this earlier, there's just so many layers to all the stories and the allegories that we have in our mythology, so to speak.
Yeah.
Again, the fact that today the democratization of art means that anyone can tell a story. Is it difficult to sell your?
Oh yeah, it's so difficult to try and differentiate. And I think one advantage that I had when it comes to the packaging of the book, because I wanted to write a fresh take on mythology to bring forward classical Hinduism and make it cool and popular, was how do I package the book and how do I make it sell? And that's where my role as an editor, kicked in. And all the years of training that I had, all the different fiction books that I had worked on, and one of the blunders I remember during the stage of the process of publishing a book that I not only had edited to a large degree but had written my entire life was to make sure that I had the right cover, a cover that spoke of its freshness, was unique, and conveyed both mythology and fantasy.
For sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
and very interestingly, we had this entire situation where, and someone who knows the timelines, I knew it was really last minute, but for 3 months we worked on a cover that was perhaps too abstract and had, colors that didn't convey action and excitement, or just wasn't as pictorial as the kind of commercial, accessible book that this is.
Sure.
And the sort of strings I had to pull and the requests I had to put in and use all my experience to make sure that it eventually came out the way that I wanted to.
Sure.
And I'm very, very happy to have, finally a product that sticks out, not only because of the post-press operations, such as the gold foil, the embossing,
Sure.
and the kind of paper that's used on the cover, but generally even the insides of it.
Also, talking of the insides, the fact that you've chosen this subject, and in today's day and age, there are, meanings that are ascribed that might not even exist right now. Was there ever second guessing in the about the current scenario that we're living in, where we're living in a very largely black and white world where the
Right.
grays and the nuances are getting lost a little? Was there ever second guessing in the things that you wanted to say in the book, or were you questioning what you were writing because it might lead to something else? Was that part of?
I think I'm gathering what it is that you're hinting at, and there was never second guessing, because that was always the core aim. I was trying to ruffle feathers. I was trying to expose how we've gone from a classical variant to a more warped modern version of the core tenets of Hinduism as well, and also bring forward events from our history very, very subtly.
Sure.
But at the same time, my intention has always been to put forward this peaceful, inherently peaceful religion.
And it's important, isn't
Yeah.
it, to actually quote the tenets in that way, to say that this is what the character used to be and
Right.
should ideally be,
Right.
and that's important. What's also important is the fact that you've managed to get this labor of love out, and there are lots of people who would probably be itching to ask you how that's done. And since we're living in a world of listicles,
Right.
3 things that you'd certainly recommend to a new author who wants to get published, and 3 things that you'd ask them to avoid.
Oh, wow. Okay. So 3 things that I've asked them to do for sure is edit their writing. Second, dive right in. Don't necessarily have to plan the entire story before you begin.
Sure.
And thirdly, read actively, and read Indian books as well, so you know what it is that you're up against and the kind of levels that you have to reach.
Fantastic. Yes, of course.
3 things that I would recommend that they don't do is rush their manuscript. Know that when you send it into a publishing house or an agent, it should be the best foot forward, your best foot forward. Get it edited, get feedback from readers and non-readers, etc. Second thing that I would recommend that they do not do is not include a holistic approach to their proposal when they're pushing a book forward or putting it out into the world. And what I mean by that is make sure that they include aspects such as how do they plan to take it forward, what sort of audience do they come with, if they have any marketing ideas that could help the publisher out.
Sure.
And make sure you're sending the front and the back matter, and what that means is you're sending the introduction and the blurb that comes at the back to
Sure.
help the editor understand what to do. And yeah, just third thing,
Sure.
make sure it's well researched, especially if I'm talking specifically, but if it's talking about mythology, make sure it's well researched and try and do something fresh, because there have been a lot of retellings in the space.
Absolutely. And you don't have to take his word or mine. You just have to pick up the book. It's called Samsara, Enter the Valley of the Gods, Saksham Garg. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for these wonderful insights and the practical advice, of course. That's, I'm sure, going to be worth its weight in gold and more. So, and all the very best. We are looking forward to what comes next as well.
Yeah.
So, congratulations and all the best.
My pleasure, Sarthak. Had a wonderful time talking, and this is part of a series, so there are a lot more books on the way.
Absolutely. So what you need to do is pick the first one up. Okay. Time to take a break and come right back. More music right here on 94.3 Radio 1.